Alrighty, connecting cloud. Okay, great. Looks like we're recording. Well, hello again. Thank you so much for being here. I'm really happy that you agreed to do this, and we're going to be able to talk about all things Thornbirds and melodramatic miniseries of the 1980s. I was just wondering if you wanted to start off doing an introduction of who you are and a little bit about your background and work.
Great. Well, hi, I'm very happy to be here talking about all things melodramatic miniseries and Thornbirds. So my name is Scott Humphries. I'm Australian, unlike most of the cast of the Thornbirds. And I actually grew up in New South Wales, where the Thornbirds set, but nowhere near where the Thornbirds are set. I did grow up in a small town, though, and a small town was not a very exciting place to grow up. So I was very, very drawn to melodramatic TV shows in particular. I also really loved all of the old movies from the 30s and 40s and 50s. Used to show them on Saturday nights and weekend afternoons where I lived. And I loved all of the soap operas, the daytime soap operas, the nighttime soap operas. It's like a constant tide of American content that, that we were getting on television and the miniseries. And I think as a far too young person, what really attracted me to melodrama was the big emotions, these incredibly exaggerated, exciting plot lines. It was so glamorous. And a lot of people talk about these sorts of shows as being escapism, but for me, it was more like a fantasy of what adult life could be like, this exciting
Oh,
sort of world out there. It was
yeah.
these shows were like a window to the world. They were filmed all over the world, and people had exciting lives and exciting confrontations all the time. There was never a dull moment. So I really loved those sorts of programs as a child, and they never left me. But as I got older, it did sort of change. I became an adult gay male. So then there was this sort of the camp and the irony, and
Mm.
you appreciate that kind of melodrama, certain melodrama on a different kind of level. But it also really got me thinking, why is it that some forms of drama are valued over others? Why is it that people feel like they have to apologize for watching melodrama? Even the word itself, it's changing a little bit now, but even the word itself is considered a bit derogatory. To call something a melodrama is to say that it's overdone, it's overbaked.
Mhm.
But a lot of people love these shows. They respond to them. Maybe they find them funny, but they're getting something out of them. And it's the emotional sort of realism they're getting out of it. So that's why I became fascinated with the idea. Well, so many people watch them and love them. They're not all watching them to laugh at them. So why is it that it's denigrated? Why is it we value some forms of drama over others? And that eventually led me then to wanting to write my book about miniseries, which I had no background really, and I have a degree in literature, and but I'd never really thought about writing a book until lockdown. And then I thought, damn it, nobody's written this book that I want. There were other books about miniseries, but they focus more on the serious sorts of
Mm.
miniseries, which
Yeah.
most of them, in my opinion, are melodramas too. But anyway, there's a distinction made between between a big important miniseries and the ones like we'll be
Sure.
talking about, which are considered more of the trashy sort of stuff. And I really hate that word trash. It's sort of,
Mm.
even though we adopt that word now as a positive in a
Yeah.
way, which is great.
Y- Yes, yes, when people say it's my trash.
Exactly, exactly. That's
Yeah.
my trash. That's my break. That's my
Right,
turn
exactly.
off my brain sort of thing. But you're
Hmm.
not turning off your brain really. We're really all absorbing it
No.
on some level. Yeah. So
Yeah.
so
Yeah,
that's where my book
totally.
came from.
I love that we both can have this connection through the melodrama in Thornbirds over lockdown, because I know, as I said in our last meeting, that's when I watched the miniseries in its
Yeah.
entirety during lockdown. And I love how you talk about how with melodramas and like the melodramatic miniseries, it's like it does speak to this emotional truth. Like the emotions are heightened, the
Yeah.
performance is like everything's heightened, but there
Yes.
is like kind of this core emotional truth that resonates with people.
Exactly. Yeah. And if it doesn't, it falls flat. Then it does become sort of comedy. If it becomes something like the Thornbirds, which has been watched by people for 40 years and is still being discovered by new people, okay, they're looking at it differently. And there's a lot of, as we'll probably talk about, there's a lot of different sensibilities we bring to something like that now. but they're still watching it. They're still connecting with it on a certain level. So there's something very real beneath the surface of bizarre storylines and unbelievable plots and really incredibly emotive confrontations and emotional displays. As fun as they
Yeah.
are to watch, though.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, I think that's the case for any kind of melodrama that has this cultural stay or kind of longevity. It just speaks to people throughout the years and generations, pretty much.
Yeah.
And touching on the Thornbirds, I figured I would ask kind of what your first introduction to either the book or the miniseries was, because as you often hear, I guess maybe outside of Australia, it's often called the Australian Gone with the Wind. And so it's one of the best selling Australian texts of all time. The miniseries was hugely popular. So, as someone who is Australian, what was your first introduction to it?
Well, actually, I think it is the highest selling novel
Yes,
fiction
I think
by an
so. Yeah.
Australian writer ever, which is
Oh.
she made a huge amount of money out of this book and the miniseries for that matter as well. So
Mm-hmm.
it really spoke to a lot of people and continues to.
Mm-hmm.
I could be cut off from being Australian for saying this, but I didn't read the book. I did try it a couple of times
Yeah.
when I was young, but I did
Sure.
watch the miniseries when I was
Yeah.
far too young to
Mm-hmm.
understand a lot of the
It's a
nuance.
long book.
It was,
I don't blame you.
and very. I have read other books of hers, and I like her stuff, but I mean, some of her other books that I've read, and she read a whole series of books of Rome, very well researched, and
Hmm.
as I'm sure parts of the Thornbirds were as well. But I did watch the miniseries when it came out when I was 8, so I'm pretty sure I
Mm.
didn't watch it
Oh.
on television. But I do
Mm.
remember my mother and my grandmother both big Richard Chamberlain fans, like everyone's mother and grandmother at the time,
Yeah.
and also both very big Brian Brown fans. And
Mm.
I can see why. I can see the appeal of both of those male actors
Mm-hmm.
to women and others.
Oh, yeah.
And so I'm pretty sure we got it on VHS video from the local video shop. And it would have been one of those big plastic things like Gone with the Wind, with
Yeah.
multiple things. And I just remember being the love story didn't interest me that much as a kid, even though that's, what I know. But what I loved was the
Mm.
drama, the hyper drama, the stuff that in the Cleary family, there was
Oh my
everything happened to
gosh.
them. Yeah, it
Yeah,
was just
yeah. Oh,
non-stop.
I know. I think I'm gonna say somewhere in my video, like the family generational trauma gives like Succession a run for its money.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yes, yes, that's
it's
right.
just constant.
At the end, when you've got the three women, when they finally turn out to be, the strongest characters of it all, and they're the one they've outlived everyone. They've
Yeah,
outseen all of
they're
the
still
the dramas, the
standing.
bushfires, the
Yeah.
boar killings, everything.
Yeah.
It
Oh my
was
gosh, I know.
so I loved all of that. I also loved. I wasn't raised religious myself, so other people might have
Mm.
found these scenes a bit different, but I loved as a child the theatricality of all the religious rituals, the ordination scenes
Oh
and
yeah.
the Latin masses and these beautiful costumes that they were
Oh
wearing.
yes.
It just
Oh, I
seemed,
know.
yeah, it was to me, it was like an
Yeah.
extension of dynasty or dynasty, sorry.
Oh, absolutely. And as like someone who also comes from like an Irish Catholic family background, I'm like all the stuff with the family and the tension with the Catholicism and the church and everything. I'm like, yep, I remember that. I
Yeah,
remember Catholic middle school, and
yeah,
you
yeah.
know, there's always a hot priest somewhere. And
Yeah, well, I wondered about that. I read something that Jermaine Greer wrote about the book
mm,
um, a few years ago, and she was writing mostly about how she liked how it described the Australian countryside, and she was very dismissive
mm.
of the romantic element as she can be. But one of the things she said is that when she was raised as a Roman Catholic, the idea of a hot priest was very difficult for her to to believe. So
Mm.
she obviously was raised somewhere where they had a lot more like that horrible nun at the beginning,
Oh
that
yeah.
disciplines Maggie or
Oh,
something.
oh gosh, and it's so much worse in the book too, because the first part of the book, they completely cut in the miniseries, which is about Maggie when she's 4 and her family still lives in New Zealand,
Ah,
and she and her siblings go to public school run by, or not, I guess not public school, but like the school run by nuns and everything, and they're just awful. They're just like
yeah,
horribly physically abusive, and I'm like, I'm
Mm.
kind of glad they cut this
Yeah, that would have been a
since
depressing way to start as well,
yeah, they had
start the
like a little
miniseries.
touch where it's like sister wraps her on the hands
Yeah,
like a few times, and then Richard Chamberlain to the rescue. So
yeah,
it's
yeah, of
yeah, a
course.
small
That's
touch of it. Yeah, yeah. I'm curious. Watching. I don't know if you maybe registered this when you were 8, but like watching it or even watching it now, do you just like see the very clear California backlot and are like,
Oh, definitely. Yeah. So, I mean, we might as well get this out of the way now. Like, Australians have a very complex relationship with this mini series. So, it was a big hit
sure,
here, like it
sure,
was all around the world.
yeah.
But, and people certainly read and loved the book, but
Mm-hmm.
it was not filmed here. and
Mm-hmm.
and most of the
No,
actors are
it's
not
not.
Australian. And people, I mean, I don't really care because you kind of we anyone who has watched American television has seen the Simi Valley in many pretending to be many different places,
Yeah,
and
sure,
so they
sure.
are very obviously not Australian, and
Yes,
they're pretty happy with the job they did.
that's
David
good.
Wolper's sort of saying, we brought in eucalyptus trees, and I didn't notice this, but apparently they get bigger as the miniseries progresses. Apparently, trees around the house they change them so
Oh,
they get bigger. So
that's a nice continuity
yeah,
touch there.
yeah,
Okay,
and they brought in one
appreciate that.
kangaroo for the initial
Oh,
scene. So yeah, it's very obvious
yeah,
that it's not a straight. And even the scenes filmed in Hawaii, they're very
yeah,
lush for Queensland.
yeah. I forget where in the text itself it is that Maggie goes to that Hawaii is
She goes
pretending
to
to
the Great
be.
Barrier Reef.
Okay,
Yeah,
yeah.
which is it's really interesting because there is an Australian miniseries which if you haven't seen, Tara, you should add to your list, called Return
I
to
will.
Eden.
Okay, yes, I remember you mentioned that in your book that you
Yeah,
read. So,
it's worth watching. But it was made the same year as the Thornbirds, but it was filmed
mm.
in Australia. So it was filmed at the Great Barrier Reef. It was
Oh,
filmed at a
okay.
cattle station in Queensland. It's meant to be somewhere else, and it was filmed around
Yeah.
Sydney as well. So you can actually
Hmm.
get a taste of um, what some of
Yeah.
those landscapes do look like from that show
Sure.
at that
Like a
time.
nice kind of compare and contrast, I'm
Yeah,
sure.
yeah,
Because in Queensland, where it's supposed to be taking place, I read it's like supposed to be a lot more green, kind of maybe like rolling hills.
yeah.
It's not Southern California. Or,
No, it's an yeah. Well,
no.
the Dugheater is meant to be in Western New South Wales, which is very
Oh,
flat.
okay.
Yeah, it's very
Oh,
sort of flat area. It's on the other side
yeah.
of the ranges, and
Yeah.
not that it looks beautiful actually. It looks in the miniseries, the
Yeah.
hills and everything. I think it looks great. So
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
it's fine, but a lot of other people don't like it. But yes, it was very obvious. And it's not just the
Mhm.
settings, it's things like
Mhm.
the fences in the field and the other they built the house,
Mhm.
but other things that they have, they're very American, that you can tell. The cars, they're driving these cars
Really?
which are left-hand drives. Well, we drive on the other side of the road. So
Oh, that's
just things
yeah.
like that. Yeah.
Mm.
But
Well,
no one would
also,
care about it.
oh, yeah. I mean, but
Americans
also
wouldn't
go,
care. Yeah.
yeah. But also going back to what you were saying about how everyone in the cast, aside from Brian Brown, doesn't have an Australian accent.
Yeah.
I don't know. I almost miss the days, sort of. I feel like another thing that comes to mind when I think of a movie that did not like anywhere attempt doing that is like a movie like Amadeus, where you have this cast of like very clearly all American actors, but I almost kind of appreciate when there's not an attempt at an accent made
Yeah.
because sometimes I'm like, maybe just take the safer route and, don't know your limitations,
Well,
don't attempt an
I guess
accent.
it's
And
more honest in some ways, but I find it
yeah,
I find it jolting when some people are doing an accent. So Ken Howard does a German
really,
accent, and Christopher Plummer does an
that's
Italian
the
accent,
Italian accent.
and
That's
they both
right.
sound, I can see what they do. They sound
Yeah,
pretty good, I think, to someone who doesn't, not a native
yeah.
speaker of it. But
Same
then
here.
Barbara Stanwyck has no Irish or Australian accent. She's just
No.
American, and
Yeah, and you almost feel like it could end up being a constraint on the performer a little
yeah.
bit. So,
Which is obviously why they didn't do it. Like you can imagine,
right. Yeah.
whereas the smaller parts, some of the actors do use Australian accents,
Sure.
so like some of the
Hmm.
shearers and the people
Yeah.
that Luke works with. And yeah, that sounds sort of funny, but I can see why
Hmm.
they didn't bother with the other actors. And it's made primarily for an American audience anyway. So
Sure.
that
Sure.
if they were all speaking in American accents, Australian accents, it could be quite hard for people to understand what some of them are saying. I should like, can you imagine Richard Chamberlain speaking in, well, he would have had an Irish accent, I suppose. I mean, he was meant to have come from,
Yes,
yeah,
yes. In the book, he's supposed to have like a little bit of like an Irish kind of aristocratic British
yeah,
voice too. But that's also, I think I said last time, like the confusion of, this family is an Irish family from New Zealand living in Australia. Rachel Ward comes out with like her very aristocratic British accent.
yeah, yeah,
The
yes.
siblings are not
And
really
Gene
something of
Simmons, I
anything.
mean, Gene Simmons has a big,
Yeah.
but that sort of works for her character, I guess, given that
Oh
she's
yeah.
where
I
she's
agree.
supposed to have come from, and
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And oh, she's so good in it.
yeah,
But
she's probably my favorite actually. My favorite
mm,
character.
of the
That's the other thing I was going to
performances.
say when I was initially watching it. I was
Hmm.
really drawn to those two older female characters, the Stanwyck
Hmm.
character and the Gene Simmons character, more so than Richard Chamberlain and Rachel Ward. I mean, that changed. I've watched it about 5 times, I think, since
Yeah,
then, and well, six now because I just rewatched it
yeah.
this week. But I really liked because they were very different. Obviously, the Stanwyck part's very showy, and that would definitely
Totally.
appeal to a young gay man. Um,
Hmm.
but the Simmons one is a much more complicated part, and she has to hold everything in, and
Yes.
and
And she's
yes,
so good at it.
she's
She's
yeah, she's wonderful.
amazing. Her just the acting she's doing with her eyes,
Yes,
and
yeah.
and yeah, there's such an interesting part in the book where it says about her characters that she was someone who felt so deeply and so intensely she had to continually just squash it down like her
Oh,
whole
yeah,
life.
yeah, yeah.
And
And you
it's so
see that in her
sad.
performance. Yeah, like she does
Yes.
it so well.
Mm-hmm.
And she's
Mm-hmm.
probably the most, even more so than Maggie, I think probably the most relatable character that many of us can,
Yeah,
relate
yeah.
to.
I mean, Maggie goes through it, but I would argue her character, I think, out of all the female characters, has had the roughest time of it for sure. I
Yeah,
mean, yeah. I mean, but like all the female characters are just so rich. I know, for me watching it initially, I'm just always drawn to like an angsty male character. I'm just like, oh, Ralph is so tortured and everything. But
yeah,
now
yeah.
it's like it's kind of also like he's tortured and it's played by Richard Chamberlain, of course, but like he also sucks. But
Well, you can
but he's
definitely be
all
both. Yes, the
yeah,
sort of the
exactly.
anguished that is definitely a thing in melodramatic miniseries and a lot of the
Yes.
popular fiction of this time. These
Hmm.
sort of anguished males who are horrible to women, and,
Yeah.
and women can't get enough of them.
Yeah, I know. And yeah, yeah, for sure, for sure. Well, kind of touching again on melodrama and kind of where the Thornbirds sort of sits in that. I was wondering if maybe you wanted to talk a little bit more about your book, the melodramatic miniseries, in terms of how you kind of seem to sort of establish this dichotomy between what was considered at the time to be like the serious epic or prestige miniseries,
Yeah,
and then the quote unquote, I'm sorry to use the term trashy, like
yeah,
female centric
yeah.
melodramatic soapy miniseries.
Well, one of the original title for my book was the working title was The Art of Trash. So I'm not
Oh,
immune to
yeah.
using the word, but I just
Okay.
decided in the end having the word trash in your title is probably not
Sure.
actually the
Mm-hmm.
smartest thing to do, but maybe it would have been. I
Mm-hmm.
don't know. But you're right. So miniseries obviously were a giant thing from the 70s through the 80s, and they petered off sort of in the 90s, these network era
Mm-hmm.
miniseries. And they really started off as stories about men. And you think of some of the biggest ones like Rich Man, Poor Man. Roots is not quite the same, but it really starts about a man's story and the people coming from him, even though there's lots of other characters. But what happens in the 80s starts really with Scruples, the Judith Krantz book that became the Lindsay Wagner miniseries, which I think is such a fascinating miniseries on so many levels because nothing really happens. There's sort of 6 hours of glamour and soap opera storyline, and you get to the
Mm-hmm.
end of it, and it's like, well, because they took all of the sex out of the book. So the book is basically about sex and consumption, buying stuff.
Hmm.
So they took that out, and you
Hmm.
get this storyline. But it was something that really appealed to a lot of, well, it was female skewing drama. It
Hmm.
doesn't mean it was just women who watched it, obviously. Lots of
Sure.
people watched it. But in
Hmm.
terms of the way they were produced, they were for women. And they were stories that had women at the center, and they were about women driving the narrative, women operating in a man's world, women who were moving into business. It was very 80s. It was very 80s sort of
Hmm.
idea of women in power. A woman in power is like a man. She's taking over the man's world, and she's acting like a man,
Hmm.
and she's using men the way that men traditionally use women, and she's in charge. So that was a
Hmm.
theme of a lot of these sort of miniseries that came after Scruples, which I talk about in my book.
Hmm.
And they were really dismissed. People sort of love them now, but critics at the time were there's a whole article in TV Guide, how do you choose good trash from bad trash? And they list a whole bunch of miniseries that they say are good trash and a whole bunch that they say were bad trash. It's about 84. So the sort of shows that they were talking about were things like Lace, uh, and Sydney Sheldon's Master of the Game. And there was one called Celebrity, which was about men. Now, Celebrity is almost a male version of Lace. It's about three men with a dark secret. They all become rich and famous, and this dark secret comes back to haunt them. Lace is about three beautiful women who have a dark secret. They all become successful, and the dark secret comes back to haunt them. And Celebrity was sort of applauded by critics. I mean, it has every piece of melodrama you could imagine in it. There's a closeted gay character, there's drug, there's incredible sex scenes, there's murder, people coming back from the dead. It's got everything. Like, it is an unabashed melodrama. But critics all said, "Oh, it's well acted, and it's a melodrama, but it's good." The critics hated Lace. They said, "Oh, this is trashy." They talked about how the women looked. They talked about their makeup. They talked particularly about the younger star, Phoebe Cates, who's fabulous in it. But they really took task with her acting, and that's the sort of difference. So
Hmm.
something that is about men is applauded. Something that's about women,
Yep.
it's trash. And that was very
Hmm.
much happening across TV at the time as well. So it was
Hmm.
now there were other miniseries as well. The prestige miniseries were things like The Winds of War, and the ones that were about very serious sorts of topics. They were almost
Hmm.
always about men as well. And women were very much the secondary sort of characters. So
Hmm.
but these were
Yeah.
ones, the melodramas were the ones which had the exaggerated storylines, and
Sure.
they were like the mini soap operas. And people watched
Yeah.
them and people loved them, but critics
Hmm.
didn't really care for them very much.
Yeah, that's so interesting how you bring up how something that is female centered or geared towards a female audience with these melodramas is kind of critically denigrated.
Yeah. Yeah.
But if it's, male centered or geared towards men, it's applauded. It wins the awards. And I think that's interesting in the context of talking about the Thornbirds and something I
Yes.
kind of want to explore
Yeah.
sort of as my main thesis in my video, which is I kind of feel like the Thornbirds is maybe a bit of like the prestige miniseries or the blockbuster miniseries is a bit of a Trojan horse because I think this is like a pretty female centric
Yeah.
melodrama. And
Yeah.
it's so interesting how, like, with the producer, oh my goodness, my cat is so. Carson,
Yes. I think.
stop, you're fine. it's it's so interesting how the producer David L. Warper is like, hated that stuff and was just like, he's a documentarian, he's a historian, he did Roots, he wants to tell family, like epic generation spanning family based stories. And it's kind of like, well, sure, Jan, that's what the Thornbirds was, because I just think it kind of lies in this interesting space in that between like the female centric melodrama
Yeah.
and then like the prestige miniseries. And I remember you yourself said in your book it was a male melodrama.
Yeah, yeah, and it's fair enough that I should have to defend that comment now because I did say that. But you're right. It was so I mean, Walper and everybody else at the time I love the way you say it's a Trojan horse, actually, because that's exactly what it is, really. But Walper and everybody else at the time said this is a searing drama about a priest who's torn between his
Mm,
commitment to God and his love of a woman, which, I even doubt that that's really what that's really about. It's really about
mhm,
his crisis of self-love. Does he pursue his ambitions, or does he prove that he's a man with this woman who really wants him? But anyway, that's
mhm,
by the by. So they were all saying that's what the story is, but the heart and soul of the story are the Cleary women. It's the three generations of those women. That is really what we connect to as viewers, and that is they are probably the most relatable characters, whether you're watching as a man
mhm.
or a woman. And then you've also got this other female, the Mary Carson character, who's the one that sets everything in motion. She's
Yes.
incredibly rich. She says, I don't want a husband, I don't want a man telling me what to do. She likes to be in charge, and she's a very phallic
Mhm.
sort of. There's a lot of Freudian stuff in here, of course, with
Yes. Oh, yeah,
all of
of
the
course.
mothers and sons and everything as well. But
Yes.
she's the one who, in a way, she doesn't drive the narrative, but she certainly sets everything going. But I think the cat has something to say about it, actually. So yes,
You like the thorn
in
birds.
my in my book, I use the term female centric miniseries
Mm,
because I really wanted to differentiate these sorts of dismissed miniseries, which are about strong female characters who drive the narrative. And
mhm,
then I talk about some other miniseries from the time, including the Thornbirds, and I do use the term male melodrama. It was hard with the Thornbirds. Like, if it's a spectrum, it's definitely in the middle,
mm,
because
mhm,
the women aren't driving the narrative. They're reacting to what the priest and other men do to them. And at least until the last episode, it changes a little bit when we get Mel
mhm.
Winningham's character, and the women all sort of start to reconcile with each other. But until
Right.
then, they're reacting to horrible men and situations, and there's not really a sense, I don't think, of female empowerment driving the storyline.
Mm, mm-mm. No.
I guess Maggie does sort of. She's got some great scenes, like
Yeah.
in the last episode in particular, where she dumps Brian Brown.
Yes.
That's just and humiliates him, and there's
I
a couple.
know.
Yeah, like that's so you just
Yeah.
yes, good. But then
Yes.
she sort of goes back to mooning after, and
Yeah.
even with Ralph,
Oh
a
yeah.
couple of times I think after she has the first baby, and then certainly after Dane dies,
Hmm.
she's really hard on him, and you're just cheering her,
Yeah.
and then she forgives him again, because
Yeah.
that's really what stands out
Yeah.
to me watching it again. And I
Hmm.
think this implanted somewhere in me as a when I first watched it, and the
Hmm.
second time as well, is if you love someone, you will suffer. You will- like, love is pain and suffering. But now I
It's a
watch it.
thorn.
Yeah, that's right. But now I watch it again, I realize it's really telling us if you're a woman, you will love and you will suffer. It is the woman's role to
Yes.
love pure. Only a woman can love purely
Hmm.
and forgive, and she will suffer for that. And there's something
Hmm.
sort of pure and
Hmm.
godly about it. It's sort of a disturbing
Yeah.
message.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And that kind of reminds me of how you establish these certain archetypes for these female characters and these female-centric melodramas. And I remember reading your book and I was trying to pin where Maggie was. I'm like, is she a
Yeah.
survivor? Is she a victim? Is she
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
yeah, she doesn't become like the boss queen of Dragita necessarily and like
No.
wins every
Although sort of
fight.
her mother kind of does. I mean,
Yeah.
she has. I mean, she sort of takes over the running of Drogheda after
Yes.
her husband dies, and
Yeah,
she's
that's
running
true.
the books, and
Yeah.
she's keeping the family together as much as she can, and
Hmm.
she sort of has that journey a little bit, I guess.
That's true. Yeah. Huh. That is true. Yeah, you're. Yeah, no, gosh, such a good character. But yeah, no, that is true when you're saying like how it is a lot of these three women kind of just reacting, which I feel like, yeah, can fall certainly into like the what you've established as like the criteria for like the female
Yeah,
melodrama, at least in terms of these. archetypes. I'm curious, do you think Ralph falls into like the hero lover? Because I remember reading your description.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, he's kind of like painted as perfect in every way, but like his one failing is his sense of duty. And this
Yeah.
time it's to the
It depends
cloth.
how you, I mean, he's meant to be a sympathetic character. This is something that I think
Yeah.
people watching it today might not necessarily agree with. But
Yeah.
he's
Mhm.
meant to be, and we're meant to really relate to his crisis, his crisis
Mhm.
of faith. But I just, and as likable as Richard Chamberlain is, like, which is I guess
Sure.
why they got him as well. It's so hard not to see him today as, like, yes, we're meant to look at him as this sort of heroic figure that's tormented, but it's so hard not to look at him as sort of somebody who grooms a child, manipulates her emotionally and financially for her whole life, pursues his own interests above everybody else's. I mean, yes, he does have a few, towards the end, he has a few realizations with Dane where he sees what perhaps a real priest is supposed to be like. And when
Yeah.
Maggie forgives him yet again, he realizes that she's actually the more Christian of the two of them after
Yeah.
all. But
And
yes, it's sort of hard to pin him down. He's a bit of an anti-hero, I think, really. He's
oh, that's an interesting take. I like
Yeah,
that
I
though.
I don't
Yeah.
know. Because I'm watching it today and thinking he's not heroic. He's not even romantic, I don't think. The stuff on the island is kind of nice, but
Oh yeah, no, I love that. I love
yeah.
all that stuff. But I can certainly see how they thought, or at least when it was made in 1983, his character was probably going to be received a very different way than
Yeah.
he is now. Absolutely, because as you bring up, and I will definitely bring up in the video, is like, I can just perfectly see people just completely shutting off and leaving the second they're like, "How old is Maggie when you meet
Yes.
her?"
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And how that very much has aged incredibly badly. Both, I think, in the text of the book and in the miniseries, especially in terms of just like again, it's in the book where it's like the Mary Carson character. She's like jealous of Maggie,
Mm,
of like a
mm.
kid.
And that's it. Well,
She's
that's in the
just
miniseries too. I
yeah.
mean,
Yes.
that
Yes.
that's and that's well, it's fascinating actually. But this is another thing from miniseries of that time. They're really out there in terms of this sort of stuff that they put in. They'll put in
Yeah.
all of the that this woman being openly jealous of the child and the hold that
In their
she has on the
relationship.
man that she wants. And she doesn't even love him.
Yeah.
She just wants to shag him. She
Yeah.
just wants to have a last fling with him. And
Yeah, and then oh my God, I can't every time Richard Chamberlain's like when you were a little girl, you were like my own child. I could have you. Then I'm like, oh,
yeah, yeah.
like
And in the copy of that I have of it on DVD, they play the little intro, with the ABC announcer at the beginning of each
yes,
episode.
yeah,
And
yeah.
he sort of says, "Oh, he loved her from the first moment he saw her," and they're showing this scene of
Oh,
him looking at a little
like
child, little
super
Timothy Penny.
intensely,
Yeah, yeah,
like
it's wrong. It's, and it's sort of, but we're meant to think that it's very romantic. But this was true of all of many other popular books at the time
mm,
as well. It was seen as acceptable, and um,
sure,
yeah.
yeah.
I
I
just
mean,
think,
oh, I'm sorry.
no, I was going to ask you something, which was,
Yeah,
do you think it could be remade today?
that's what I was just thinking about while we were talking about this. I think yes, I think it could be, but the framing of that relationship
Mm,
and the character of Ralph is gonna be completely different. It has to be,
yeah,
I think,
yeah,
nowadays, because like you're saying, it was just, made in a time period where, at least from what little I've kind of read about it in your book, it seems like they just wanted to kind of throw in, again, this could just be par for the course with the genre of melodrama, but they kind of wanted to throw in every sort of like taboo or shocking thing
mm,
possible without really engaging with it
yeah,
critically, just kind of to have it for like the shock value or
yeah.
for the drama.
Titillation. Yeah,
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah.
So I think if they remade it now, they would certainly have to like very critically engage with that relationship and, you
Mm,
know, definitely in a more serious way in the way that the miniseries just didn't
yeah,
because
yeah.
it wasn't even probably a factor that they were considering.
No, they wouldn't have. They wouldn't have even thought about it. They would have just thought of this.
Hmm.
This is a great, big, romantic story that,
Hmm.
the romance will appeal to the women, and the crisis of the man will appeal to the male viewers. So
Sure.
we'll get everyone in, and they wouldn't have thought about
Yeah.
anything like trauma. Because I was thinking
Hmm.
about this too. I think you definitely could remake. I think it could be quite
Yeah.
a rich, but you'd have to put in
Yes.
so much more, like the context of the Catholic Church. It's sort of,
Absolutely.
you
Yeah.
can't revere it knowing what we know, and particularly with the time that
Exactly.
it's set, and where, he's come from Ireland
Yes.
to Australia, and you think, well, what was happening in the church where he left there, from what we now know, that sort of stuff. And
Yeah.
even this is not something that an international viewer would probably notice, but there's no First Nations people, there's no presence of anyone who's not white in
Yeah.
Drogheda or
Hmm.
around, and that's not really
Right.
realistic for what that part of Australia would have been like at the time. So there's
Hmm.
sort of that, as well as the relationship with there's a lot of things you'd have to address. It'd be a very different kind of miniseries, and if they could still make a
Hmm.
romance out of it, it would be very challenging to do. But I think it'd be
It
interesting.
would be. I think it would be too. I think it's still a really rich text, I think, with
Yeah.
its themes and characters. And I'm curious if they did remake it. Do you have any Australian fan cast for
Gosh, I hadn't
Maggie or Ralph?
I hadn't thought about that, but there are so many Australian actors now
Oh yeah.
that are internationally active as well. So you definitely could cast
Oh
it with,
yes.
yeah. I don't know
Yeah.
what, probably not. Yeah, I don't know. I probably shouldn't say.
Oh no.
I was thinking probably
Yeah.
not like a Chris Hemsworth type. That's probably what
I
they would do. They would,
I was literally I was gonna joke Chris Hemsworth, but then I didn't want to be like that one American who's like, I know Australian actors, Chris
no,
Hemsworth, right?
no.
But
I
yeah.
was thinking, yes, if they did that, it would probably be going down a different road if they were.
Oh,
But I could
you
definitely
know,
see them do that and having him ripping
yeah.
off his robes or something. Yes. Actually, now
You
that I'm
know,
thinking about it, maybe we should pitch this.
yes, yes, no. I'm like thinking, what do you think about like Kate Blanchett for like Mary Carson? Is she too aristocratic seeming, or like no? I mean, I could see it.
No.
She can do tough.
Yeah, she
Yeah.
could definitely get her teeth into something like that.
Oh gosh. Yeah. Oh
Anyway,
no, just
sorry, I
all the
have got us off
potential.
track a bit,
No,
but
swirling. No, no, all the potential casting we should pitch. But yeah, yeah, for sure. I'm curious on your recent rewatch if there is anything else you noticed for the first time, I guess, with either like the story or the characters or the production.
yeah, there were,
Um,
well, I noticed something different every time that I watch it actually. And the last time I watched it was only about 2 years ago, so it wasn't really that long ago. But I really noticed a lot more about the mother-son relationships that
mm,
I think it's called like a Jocasta Oedipal type relationship, and how that's
mm,
passed down from. So the Jean Simmons character has her pride and joy Frank, and she says horrible things early on, like, I try to forget that I have a daughter, and mothers
yeah.
mothers love their sons, and we find out why she loves this boy so much, because he
Mm.
reminds her of the man that she loved, and it's really sick actually. But then and then
It
and
is.
then but with all the other stuff going on with the priest and everything, I don't think I quite appreciated that. So she sort of, like, there's a scene in the rain where she tells him, like, it's time for you to go out and get a wife now, and it's almost
Yes.
like she's breaking up with him.
Yeah, yeah. She's like, you shouldn't be thinking about me so much.
Yeah,
And
and it's almost like you can see on her face again, the Gene Simmons acting again. You can sort of see her thinking, "Oh crap! Like, I've done this. Like, I've encouraged this, and now he thinks that
yeah,
we're like a couple."
yeah,
Sort
yeah,
of. So she, and
yeah.
then it's a bit different, but Meg is sort of the same. Certainly the way she talks about Dane, it's like her piece of Ralph, her piece that she's
Yes.
stolen from God, and then poor Meggie.
Yeah.
Like, I think I told you, I think I said that one of the first things I thought is that watching this, love will bring suffering. And that really comes through again for Maggie. You think, how does this woman go on? She says it repeatedly. Every person I love gets taken from me, from
I
God. And there's that scene at the end with all of the names on the mausoleum. And
Yeah, and then Ralph is always just like, "Come on, Maggie, fuck up." Like, it's gonna be
yes,
fine. It's like,
it's like, yes, another one gone. It's like, it's the kiss of death. And you kind of think, but that foreboding of tragedy is so common in melodrama. So there's a scene just before Dane dies where Jussie says something like, "I've never been so happy," or I actually wrote it down because I thought this is so, yeah, I don't
Yeah.
deserve to be this happy. And as soon as somebody says that in
Yes.
melodrama, the next scene is
Hmm.
going to be tragedy. And of course,
Of course. And
it
after
does.
like Dane, the most perfect human who ever lived,
Yeah,
is just like, you
yeah,
deserve love, Jesse,
yeah,
and it's gonna be fine. And it's like,
yeah. And,
no.
and, and that's the other thing. Whoever is the most perfect, most lovable, kindest character will always die.
Hmm. I
Yes.
feel like that's true to the melodrama
Yeah,
genre
that's right.
across,
It's
yeah,
a
across
rule.
the.
It's a rule. It's a rule of
Oh,
melodrama.
absolutely.
So
Um,
yes, I guess they're the things that
yeah.
I probably noticed. But how many times have you watched it now?
I think this was actually only my second rewatch. I
Yeah,
think I
okay.
only watched it all the way through when I did in 2020 during the pandemic. But it's kind of funny because I rented it from the library, so I had it on DVD, and they have one episode and on each side, and so I didn't know that, so I played
Oh,
episode one, and then I put in the next DVD, and I'm like, episode three, like I'm like, wait a minute, Maggie's getting married, and I very much remember seeing a clip where she and Ralph were like making out in the stables, and like there was,
yeah,
I missed
yeah.
that episode, so I'm like, oh, I gotta rewatch.
How interesting to watch it out of order like that too. I wonder if you could, because the fourth
Yeah.
episode is a bit like that. The way it just
Hmm.
skips through the decades so
The
so
I guess to
quickly.
the point they got such complaints, they're like, fine, we'll make another mini series about the time that was lost. It's like, I guess I don't think we needed it, but I mean,
Well, apparently it did very well. I haven't seen it. I haven't seen the
really,
follow-up
okay,
miniseries. Yeah, but
yeah,
apparently, according
I
to David Wolper's book, they did quite well.
yeah, I haven't either. Like I said, it's hard for me when they recast a character. I'm like,
Yeah. Well, they did ask
uh,
Rachel Ward to come back and Brian Brown too, but they obviously didn't want to. And Richard Chamberlain kept saying, this is in David Wolper's book, Richard Chamberlain saying, look, there's nothing more to play in this, and he was very critical of the script. And he was saying, no, the first miniseries is the highlight of my career. There's no way I could go back and
yeah,
ruin that character
yeah.
unless you paid me $4 million. And
I was gonna say, I think we know why Richard Chamberlain came back.
and which was a record amount, apparently. No one had been paid that much for a miniseries at the time, apparently.
Hmm.
And so they found $4 million, and he managed to get
He
over it.
managed to reach in and bring Father Ralph back. He found
But
him
the
again.
actually, the other thing I wanted to say that I did notice a bit more watching this time was the editing. So certainly the scene at the beginning of the second episode, the third episode when she marries. So it begins with the organization, and it's being intercut with Maggie's wedding, and she's wearing the Ashes of Roses dress.
Mm,
Is that the second
yes,
episode, or it's the second of the,
that
anyway,
was the
wherever it is,
third. The
the
third.
third, yeah.
Yeah.
um that I thought was done. I thought that was done really well, and I hadn't quite appreciated some of the other editing
Yeah.
bits as well. Like,
Yeah, I enjoyed that scene too. I don't know why. It was maybe because of like the Catholic stuff. It was just made me think of
yeah,
like The Godfather.
yeah, it
It's
is.
like
It
they're
is.
killing everyone. Michael's being baptized. It's like a
Yeah,
baptism, but metaphorical. But yeah, it was
yeah,
making me think of that with the cross
yeah.
cutting a little bit, which was yeah, really good. Yeah.
And I think we should also mention the music. So, I mean,
Yes.
the score is wonderful, but I really think melodrama, apart from being about emotion and emotional realism, is also
Mhm.
about music. I mean, it's the melody of, of the melodrama,
Yes.
and it really guides as viewers our feelings and tells us what's coming up and how we should be feeling. And this one does it so well. It's
It's
just,
it's my
and
favorite.
yeah, the
It's one of my
changes and the scene. I think it's, if you had an ordinary sort of score or something generic, it would take so much out of it. But it's just such a powerful, beautiful piece of music on its
yes.
own that,
It really is, and I think that's a major part of why this series, miniseries in particular, I think is kind of like my melodrama, sort of where it has that kind of like it's heightened, but it has that emotional truth to it, and I think the
yeah,
music
yeah,
absolutely is
yeah,
a major part of that. It's just so gorgeous.
yeah,
Mhm.
yes.
So beautiful. Um, Well, I'm trying to think if there is. I have one more question I'll ask you at the end, but if there's anything else you wanted to say regarding the Thornbirds, it could be the miniseries, the book, the legacy. I guess actually, what kind of is the legacy of it in Australia? Probably still pretty big, I'd imagine.
It's sort of, well, when I was writing my book and I tried to describe to people what a melodramatic miniseries was, they always said, you mean like the Thornbirds? And people of all ages. So it's, which is interesting because I don't really cover it in my book because I was very determined that I because it was covered in so many other books that I wanted
Sure.
to focus on
Yeah.
other ones. But that's exactly that. It has a resonance with people who haven't even seen it. It's sort of I think I wouldn't, my partner always says that I will say things like, everybody knows this obscure actress from the 1920s. Everybody knows that. So I was about to say
Yeah.
everybody knows about the Thornbirds, but I think a lot of people do. And a lot of people, if you talk about a big melodrama, a big sort of miniseries, they will think of the Thornbirds. It just had such an impact at the time it went out, and has continued to. So I think its legacy is bigger than the actual miniseries itself in some ways. Like I think if
Sure.
you actually, I don't know that everyone
Yeah.
would sit down today to watch 9 hours worth of well, they watch a lot more, I guess, in the limited series on streaming type things, but
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but it is a big commitment. But I mean, once you start watching it though, it's hard to turn it off. I think.
It really is. It has just, yeah, kind of a really great hook,
Yeah,
for sure. And it's interesting how with the miniseries format at the time, it was like a new episode every night because now
yeah,
it's usually episodes are released all at once or
yeah,
it's weekly.
yeah.
So it's just, yeah, I'd wonder what that would be like to sit down and watch a nearly 2 hour movie basically
Well,
every night.
that's the thing that I can't. I mean, obviously, I remember that happening as well at the time that
Hmm.
that miniseries
Hmm.
came out. But it was amazing that they were on, like, Monday through Wednesday night, and you had to watch it every night. And of the
Yeah.
Thornbirds, two of the episodes went for 3 hours, including ads.
Yeah.
After the year after the Thornbirds, there was Master of the Game, which is a Sydney Sheldon one with Diane
Hmm.
Cannon, also quite loopy in different different ways. That isn't remembered as well today, but it was 3 episodes, 3 hours each on 3 consecutive nights. So
Hmm.
that's like all of your time after work for, for the whole first half of the week, and it was the highest rated miniseries of that
Mm.
year. The Thornbirds was the
Hmm.
second highest rated miniseries ever. And so people
Hmm.
obviously wanted to get lost in these worlds. They obviously
Yeah.
wanted to get lost in that story. Whereas today, I think we watch them and it's kind of nice to have a little break in between to digest it a bit. But
Oh yeah. Yeah. That's true. Can be a little long. As
yeah,
my brother said, is this episode's still going? I was like,
yeah.
yep.
And
Pulling
because
this
there's
walk on the
padding
beach.
in it that they wouldn't have today. So there was one
Oh
scene I
yeah.
was watching where this plane is taking off and it's taking forever, or landing. I think it's landing. This plane's
Hmm.
landing and then the car moves a little way towards the thing and then the plane goes some more and the
Yeah.
car goes some. Like, just get to the point.
I
Who's in
know.
the plane?
Oh, I know. My breaking point was when Maggie goes to the island area. I'm sorry. It was the Bay. Yeah, I can't remember.
Matlock
But
Island,
she
I think they
Matlock
call it.
Island.
Yes,
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 Matlock. She goes there and she sees her beautiful, luxurious like hotel
yes.
resort B and
For
B
two
she can stay
months, by
at
the way. She's
for
got 2 months
oh
there
yeah,
away from her
two
baby.
months fully paid. Doesn't have
Yeah,
to care for
yeah,
the baby she just had. Fully paid. So she like walks out on the balcony and
yeah.
then she's on the beach and then we get it's like fading in and out of like the same beach. It's just then
It's
she's
like
like
a
laying
video
down.
clip. It's like a
Yeah,
music video, and because
it
we have
really
that beautiful
is.
the Maggie's theme, the music, and yes, but
Yes.
I thought that too. How long can she walk up and down this beach in
And
different dresses?
cry.
Yeah, and
Yes, and
crying.
dress and cry.
She
And
did too
it's
much
just
crying. Yeah,
yeah, yeah. I'm always curious watching melodramas like these or shows from that time period when I just like see how much tears are there. I'm like, okay, come on. Did we
yeah.
whip those up or was like
I wondered that too. Like at the end where they've all got the aging makeup, and we
oh,
can
it's
laugh
so
at
bad.
it.
It's so
Yeah,
the
we can
aging
laugh
makeup
at
is
it
so bad.
today, but at the time, people probably thought that
Yeah,
was
it
okay.
was
But
fine. Yeah.
she's got all these fake wrinkles around her eyes, but she still
Hmm.
looks young and beautiful. And they
Yes.
put stuff on her neck. But then she
Yeah.
cries, and there's
Hmm.
this gushes of water sort of sitting on her wrinkles there. And it's so distracting, but I'm thinking that has to be like glycerin. There's no way, even if she could cry human
Yeah.
tears there, there's no way that
Yeah.
it could naturally not be absorbed by all the makeup.
Yes. Yes, because I think realistic crying, it doesn't look aesthetically good.
No, it doesn't look pretty.
Especially because your nose runs a lot and we have to have our beautiful cast look good, of course. So
Yeah, yeah. And the
you
tears
definitely
don't
have
just
some.
stream perfectly down one
Yeah,
cheek,
yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah, I
crying
know.
is very important to melodrama.
Oh, absolutely. With the score swelling in the background. But I think, like you said, with the plane and with the beach and everything, you have all these scenes that just go on and on that don't add anything. And it's because
Yeah,
I it's like you said, it's the 80s. It's this era of like glamour and excess. We gotta show off our location.
yeah.
Gotta show it off.
We
And
paid for it.
so
We paid for that plane. We paid for this island.
we're using it, damn it.
We're going to
Yeah.
show it, yes. But then on the
Yeah.
other hand, there's these scenes in Rome where you've got this really dodgy looking stock footage of the
Mhm.
Vatican, and then
Yeah, I do remember that.
you see them walking down a street, which is obviously a backlot somewhere in Los Angeles, and they've put these Italian signs onto the fake
Hmm.
buildings. So, but that's I don't know. I
Yeah.
love all of that. I love all of
Kind of
yeah,
part of the charm. Yeah.
yeah. I think it is.
Uh,
Yeah.
oh yeah, absolutely. Um, well, I guess another quick thing is I remember you telling the story about Jane Seymour's very unfortunate audition chemistry test with Richard Chamberlain. I was wondering if you would just want to maybe
Tell it
retell that,
again.
tell it again for
I
whoever
feel I
watches
I
this.
feel obliged to say that Jane Seymour has told this story several times.
Yes.
So she has.
Okay.
This is not some
Word. Yes.
person saying. So she
No, we
herself
love
has.
Jane.
Yeah, she herself has
Yes.
told this story. So
Yes.
Jane Seymour was one of the many actresses considered for the part of Meggie, and she really wanted the part.
Hmm.
And she was the queen of the miniseries at the time. She'd been in East of Eden just a couple of years before, one of the most incredible miniseries and incredible performances ever, I think, and many, many others. So she wanted the role of Maggie, but they made her and all of the other actresses test. She had just had a baby like weeks before, I think, like 6 weeks before or something like that.
Hmm.
And she so she did this test with Richard Chamberlain, which was one of their love scenes. I think it was one of the scenes from the island. And she started lactating during the scene with Richard Chamberlain. He got very awkward. She got very awkward. They never quite recovered from it. And she didn't get the part. But which is pretty horrible. And so she could never
Yes.
watch that miniseries afterwards, she said. And
More than understandable. I mean, you would think they'd let her maybe do a
do it
redo.
again. Yeah.
Yeah. Does it
Well,
have to be a love scene?
I I
Like,
thought how horrible that was, but then last
yes.
night when I was rereading part of David Wolper's book, he said that the reason they went with Rachel Ward instead of
Mm-hmm.
Jane Seymour was that Jane Seymour came off as too strong and too
Mm-hmm.
they couldn't believe the vulnerability that she would be hung up on this priest for so long. So that's why
Mm-hmm.
they went with Rachel. But interesting, Rachel Ward is not a great fan of her own performance. I was watching an interview with
Oh
her
yeah.
where she was saying they made her, she favors a more naturalistic style, but they got a coach in to
Mm.
make the melodrama bigger. I think she's great in it.
I do too, and I think it's certainly a testament to her skills and the director that everyone kind of seemed to be on the same level in terms of the acting and like the kind of acting they were doing. It's all
Yeah.
pretty evenly matched, and I could see why she would have that perspective because I know she was very young at the time, and I think it was only her second
Mm,
role. And to take on a leading role like that so young, like and all that pressure, it's yeah,
yeah.
I couldn't do it, but yeah, no, I
Yeah.
think she's really good, and she and Richard Chamberlain I thought worked really well together because
Yeah.
I feel like it's certainly a story that's kind of be made or broken by your casting for
Oh,
sure.
very much, yeah.
Mm,
And their chemistry with each other. Like you, because there's so many problems with the love story, you really have to
yeah.
like the actors and believe them together.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I was also thinking this watching the miniseries, given how uncomfortable it is in the context of like when they first meet, she is a child, he's a grown man. I thought it kind of weirdly helps that Richard Chamberlain just doesn't age for like
Yeah.
20 years, and then you have
And then
Maggie go
rapidly.
from, yeah, and then rapidly with like spray paint, white hair. But then you have Maggie go from 10 to like a clearly adult woman, like
Yeah.
who it's like, okay, helps a little bit because even in the book and when she like first arrives at the party in her pink rose dress and everyone's
Oh,
staring
that
and everything, she's
scene.
she's
Yes.
supposed to be 15.
Yeah.
Like, and
I
that's
know. You do the
I'm like, I'm glad
calculations.
it's
Yes.
still a child. Yeah, so I'm
Yes.
glad it's like finally we have an adult in this scene. And Rachel
That,
Champ,
but
yeah.
well, that's that party scene. I mean, that where she comes down the stairs, and what a wonderful way to introduce
Oh,
the
so
adult
much, yeah.
character. It's so beautiful.
Yes.
But also, all the women are flirting with him so outrageously at that party.
I
I'd
know.
forgotten about that till
How
they're all throwing themselves at this priest.
I know. I mean, the gall. I would be far too embarrassed, even if it was
Yeah,
Richard Chamberlain. But like, you're reading the book, and it just goes on and on about like how much of an Adonis this man is, and it's like he's the most beautiful, handsome man to ever live. So I guess
yeah.
that's why we got to get Chris Hemsworth. I guess. So
Yes. Yeah, I'm liking that idea now, actually, the more I think about
yeah,
it.
yeah, I could see it. He's getting out of Marvel. He wants to go more serious.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
But
exactly. I think we could sell it to him.
I think so too.
Then we
We
have
have
to
to
think
get
of
our
a
little
Maggie,
specs.
a suitable. I think Maggie needs
Oh,
more backbone in this new version because
yes.
every time
Oh
she got a
yeah.
backbone, she then
Hmm.
quickly lost it. So that's,
Yeah,
you're
I
sort of
know.
cheering for her, and then she's like, oh, okay, she's back.
Yeah, Mary Carson's the only one who's like, screw you to Ralph and stuck by it.
Well, she is. I mean, Mary Carson's great because she's screw everyone. I'll treat them how I want. I'm not going to have a man
Yeah.
telling me what to do. But she's also humiliated by, she wants
She
this
is.
hot young guy. She's willing to give him all of her money in
Yeah,
exchange for a quick fling. But you would think,
I know.
and yet she ends her life. Well, does she end it? Because we see her breathing quite a lot actually in the scene where she's on the bed dead. But
I
anyway,
didn't even notice that. Oh,
oh
that's so bad.
yeah, when you've watched it several times, you see that.
Mhm.
Yeah, she's lying there breathing quite a lot. But see, when it went out on television, people wouldn't have
Oh,
thought that.
oh,
They would
I'm
have been
sure.
rewinding. So, is she really breathing?
I know, like she's so strong, but also like he kind of like is her undoing, which is frustrating because it's like she like a badass woman like her should not be like undone by that. But like also just like the fact that it's always trying to frame her as like this evil witch or something like that for being like it's kind of weird that you're really close with this kid. I'm like she's right. She's
Yeah.
saying everything that's true.
Yes, that's
And
right.
that's what's funny.
She's and they also make out that she's sort of so withered and old and unattractive, and she's not. I mean, she's Barbara Stanwyck. She's riding a
No.
horse, and
She looks amazing. I
she
mean,
looks
like the party
fantastic.
scene, yeah, with the white dress. Everyone's like, "How could she wear white?" I'm like, "Cause she pulls it off."
Yeah,
She looks great. Even though in the book it does describe her as more, I think, like frumpy or kind of losing her looks
yeah.
or things like that. But no, it's still an
Appar-
'80s.
Apparently, they did make her up to try. She was 75 when she played the part, but she didn't look it, and she did. I mean, she did the
Oh,
Colbys a couple of years later. Unfortunately for her, this would have been a much better swan song for her
oh,
career.
sure. Well, I
But
think I want to say she and Gene Simmons both won Emmys. I think for their
oh, I didn't know
performance.
Gene Simmons did as well. Yeah, Barbara
I
Stanwyck
think she
definitely
did.
did. Yeah.
Yes. Oh, yeah, she got her big monologue. But I think Gene Simmons did, which makes me happy. Richard Chamberlain, I know, didn't get the Emmy, but he did win the Golden Globe.
Although they're
So
sort of tainted now, the Golden Globes, aren't they? They're
that's true.
yeah. They used to hold them up. Everyone used to say the Golden Globe winning star, and now if they don't have an Emmy or a SAG award,
Yeah.
they tend
Yeah.
not to mention them. But apparently,
Yeah.
yes, apparently they made Barbara Stanwyck up to look older than she was. But I can imagine that she would not be taking too much of that aging makeup.
Yeah. yeah, no, she looked great for sure. So I'm trying to think any other thoughts, but I think we've covered quite a bit of the Thornbirds and melodrama in the miniseries. So I guess to kind of just wrap it up, I love in your book how you describe the female-centric miniseries as the money, sex, and power
Oh, yes,
shows,
yes.
and how they are often kind of based on these um, pulpy, sort of quote unquote, again, trashy paperbacks that were really popular and were geared towards women at the time. Like, again, I think of Princess Daisy. Like, I don't know why
Yes.
that one stuck out to me when I was reading it. Maybe because the plot sounded just absolutely
Ludicrous.
unhinged,
Yeah.
for sure. But also by Judith Krantz.
Yeah.
And so I'm just curious, like for anyone who would be interested in exploring that genre, do you have any recommendations of
For the books or for the miniseries or for the,
oh, it could be books, it could be miniseries, whether, start with this, it's like a good starter one, or this
yeah.
is like a personal favorite that you have.
Well, look, this is a good one to start with, actually, because it's such a classic, The Thornbirds, and there's something in it
Yeah.
for everyone, really. So
Yeah.
I would definitely start with that. After this, it's not really doesn't it's a melodrama, but it doesn't quite fall into this money, sex, power one. But the British miniseries Brideshead Revisited does sort of deal with
Mm,
some ideas around
sure.
religion in a much more reverential way than the Thornbirds. That
Yeah.
might be interesting to some people. But another one, the one that I would go to after this is Mistral's Daughter, which from 1984. It's by Judith Krantz. I think it's the best Judith Krantz miniseries. There were six Judith Krantz miniseries, by the way. Yeah, all of them, most of them produced by her husband as well. So they had a real thing going. She'd put out a
Mhm.
book one year, he'd do the miniseries the next year, she'd re-release the book with a new tie-in cover. Then she'd do another
Mm.
book the following year. And they had this cycle through all of the 80s. It was so
Yeah.
clever. But Mistral's
Interesting.
Daughter is about another man who is very egocentric. He's a crazed artist, Stacy Keach, and a total bastard. And all of these three generations of women, illegitimate women, who fawn over him, plus Lee Remick, who's this wonderful. The more I think about it, the character types are actually very similar to the Thornbirds, and it takes place
Yeah.
over the same period from the 1920s to the
Okay. Yeah.
1960s, but it's set in Paris and Provence, and Stephanie
Mm.
Powers is she was about 42 or 43 when she made it, but she starts
Mm.
off playing a 17-year-old. They're always young. 17-year-old artist model in Paris, becomes the toast of Paris and goes on
Mm-hmm.
30 years. So I would definitely go to Mistral's Daughter. It's lavish,
Mm-hmm.
it's a bit ludicrous. It's filmed in Paris and looks wonderful. And that's a great one. Another one, which I do think is a classic everyone should see, is Lace from
Yes.
1984. So it's another one beautifully filmed in Europe and Switzerland, really incredible locations. That's the one that's about three women. One of them gave birth to a child years before, who grows up to become a unlikely porn star slash movie goddess. And she wants to find out which one her mother is and punish her for abandoning her. And it is just so over the top. I mean, the book that it's based on by Shirley Conran is
Yeah.
worth reading too. That's probably, if I was going to pick one of these books to read, it would be that one because it's such
Interesting.
a good book. But everything is in it. If you can, there's BDSM, there's
Yeah.
lesbianism, there's
Yeah.
underage sex, there's child porn, there's anything that could happen to a female happens in this book because there's five women in the book, so it's huge. It's like the size of a book.
No.
And
And
but the
spread it
mini,
out over them.
yeah, that's right. They all have different cross-dressing husbands, everything.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but the miniseries, it takes out most of the sexy stuff because these miniseries, it was mostly implied. It was all mostly sort of
Sure.
longing looks and fish mouth kissing and that sort of stuff. But it is so much fun, and it really is
Yeah.
very campy and very enjoyable
Mm-hmm.
and very over the top. So I would definitely recommend Lace as well. And then the last one I would say to look at would be Sins, which is from 1986 with Joan Collins. It's a very good example of money, sex, and power, and of a lead female character. It's kind of demented, but it is incredibly. It's this 7 hour
Mhm.
epic of Joan Collins fighting off Nazis, building a publishing empire in Paris from nothing. All these enemies trying to destroy her. Meanwhile, she's wearing these beautiful Valentino gowns. She's got something like 87 costume changes. So every scene starts with her walking into a room, and you get a long shot to appreciate her dress, and then she emotes, and there's drama, and it's filmed in Paris and Venice, and it's so 80s. It's just everything over the top and lavish, and it's got this huge cast of stars, Lauren Hutton and Marissa Berenson, and all of these wonderful European actors hamming it up just so wonderfully. So I think it's a good one to watch as well. They're probably the
Oh,
standout ones,
yeah.
and ones that you can find pretty easily too.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. I'm all for bringing back looking fabulous while fighting Nazis.
Yeah,
So,
exactly. I think we need more of it, you know.
yeah.
And this is something like we wouldn't do it today, but these miniseries could take serious topics. It happens in Mistral's Daughter as well. You know,
Mm-hmm.
they take serious topics like the war and Holocaust, and then they put them into a melodramatic narrative, and it's
Sure.
somehow not offensive, but it could be.
Interesting. Oh, yeah. Well, I feel like, yeah, a fair bit of these melodramas could probably also, like, they definitely fall into, like, the offensive
Yeah. Oh yeah,
based
yeah.
on just everything we were, like, they gotta throw everything in there in terms
Yeah.
of what happens,
They
for
are
sure.
products of their times. Like we
Oh,
do have to
mhm.
remember that when
Yeah.
we watch them.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't want them to become like something like Gone with the Wind, where people feel like they have to put trigger warnings on them or ban them now because of like
Mm-hmm.
these are all trigger warnings. If you're going to watch these miniseries, it is one non-stop trigger warning. But that's
Sure.
the context of the time that they came from.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Which again makes me interested to wonder like if any of these were remade. Like
Yeah.
what they could be like maybe in like a fun deconstructionist way or like
Yes.
a satirical way or something like that.
I think that's
Mhm.
well. There's one they're making, like Jilly Cooper, who was the British Bogbuster author, and they made a couple of miniseries based on her books in the '90s, which were her books are very funny. They're very British. Like they've
Yeah.
got a sense of humor, and they're about these outrageous characters. Usually there's like horses or something involved as well. Not in the
Mhm.
sex stuff, but there's
Mhm.
but they're making one now of one of her books from the 80s or
Oh,
90s. I think well, they've made it. It's coming out on Disney Plus. It's called Rivals, but they've set it in the 80s. So it's made now, but they've set it as a period piece. And I saw the preview for it the other day, and it looks like it's going to be really clever. So I think it's definitely going to be sort of
interesting.
an ironic sort of take on it, but with all
Oh,
the
I love that.
hairstyle. And I think
Yeah.
that could definitely be interesting. I'm looking forward to seeing that one anyway, to see how, and I think that's how you would do it if you were trying to
Mhm.
remake these. You'd have to lean into the really
Yeah,
playing up the
absurdity.
deconstruction and the irony and
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Oh, well, I'm definitely adding that to my list. That sounds really interesting.
yeah.
Well, thank you so, so much for agreeing to do this. It's been an absolute joy to get to talk with you about this mini series that I really love and to explore the genre and to hear your expertise about it. And I really appreciate you giving your time.
Oh, well, thank you very much. And I'm really looking forward to seeing your video essay about it and finding out what it is that you love about it as well. I think it will be so
Thank
interesting to hear
you.
your take on it.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I am attempting for like the end of summer before the semester starts. I'm like, I can do it. So, fingers crossed I can get it out
That's
before
fine too.
then. But yes, I will be sure to let you know when I do. And yeah, thank you again.
Great. Thank you. Bye.
Right, bye.